Hi, guys. If you are just finding us, my name is Maria, and I founded a company called Travelries to help more people take adult gap years, travel sabbaticals to learn to travel long term because there are just not enough resources out there to help with long term travel. It's really different from vacation. And today, I'm really excited. I get to chat with a couple named Ellie and Luca. And they are 24 and 25 years old from the UK, and they are on a 10-month-long trip through a couple different parts of the world. And I think this is going to be really interesting to you if you are especially on the budget end of the backpacker spectrum. They have some great tips. They've been really thoughtful about their budget. And I think there's just a lot that you can learn from them. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, guys. I am super excited to have with me today Ellie Ridley and Luca Hughes Piper. Let's dive right in. So you guys are pretty new to hitting the road. Can you tell us a little bit about what made you decide to take this big trip in the first place and what was going on before? What were you doing before?
I think the biggest thing that drove us to doing a longer trip is that it's actually so much more affordable to visit places together than separate trips. So we could go to Southeast Asia and then fly home and then go to Australia and fly home, but that is so much more expensive than hopping from Indonesia to Australia. So it's actually much more affordable to visit all the places we wanted to visit in one go to save the flights back home. We were both working before and we were just saving up independently before we met. And then quite early on in our relationship, I mentioned that I kind of planned to leave and go traveling for a year. And fortunately, they had been having the same ideas as well. So that was good to establish early on.
How did you guys decide on where you wanted to go and how long you wanted to travel for?
I can't really remember. Can you remember?
Well, I think Southeast Asia is such an accessible backpackers route, especially for beginners, because it is so commonly done. So it's, in a way, it's one of the safest ones to do because there's a route basically planned for you. There are backpackers hostels everywhere. There's information online everywhere for you to cross-reference. It is just much more accessible than if we maybe went straight to South America, which isn't as budget friendly and it's less commonly done. So I think that felt like quite an easy place to start because it's more affordable as well. And then we actually started in Japan because that was kind of en route and that was just somewhere we both always wanted to go. And outside of Southeast Asia, it was just places like Australia and New Zealand, which are on the bucket list, but not accessible to the UK. It's like $1.50 just to fly to Australia.
Wow.
And then we're ending in America because my brother recently, like last year, moved there. So if you're in New Zealand, you may as well go to America, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I agree.
So I think that it just kind of all fell into place of what's nearby. And then we did have to consider places that were nearby that we wanted to go to that is just for another trip, like China, we haven't done. South America, we've decided is going to be a trip on its own. And yeah.
I think it's sort of one of those things where the route sort of made itself for us in a way. Like once we'd established Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, the US, that was pretty much a very black and white route. And then within that, we could then deep dive and say, well, which parts of Southeast Asia do we want to cover? Where's going to be, actually financially viable for us to travel? And for how long, we're in Singapore at the moment, which we've realized very quickly is not that financially viable for backpackers, but is a nice stop amidst.
Yes.
And then as well, we considered seasons because we didn't want to have to pack two different wardrobes. So we're mostly following summer until we get to New Zealand, which is going to be autumn. So that's going to feel a little bit cold, but also autumn in New Zealand is amazing. So that seems fine. But we can't just hop back and forth between different climates because that makes packing so much more difficult.
Yes, I think that is a great point for, especially if you are a true backpacker, literally traveling with the backpack. If you're going to travel through 3 seasons, that's a lot of stuff to bring. That you can, buy things when you're there. And of course you want to avoid monsoon season in Southeast Asia as much as you possibly can. Have you stuck to your itinerary so far, or do you think it will evolve at all?
We stuck to it in the sense that I think we had an idea going into this that we'd like to plan more than we wouldn't plan. So I think as travelers anyway, we realized quite quickly that we were better suited when we actually had stuff out in advance with flexibility within the days rather than within the weeks.
Yeah.
So we'd sort of have an idea of how many days in each place we'd want to spend. Also for budget, because it was so much easier to book far in advance, even though a lot of people told us, you'll want to just decide on the day where to go. It wasn't fun for us. And then we did have a bit of a mini disaster when we were traveling through Vietnam, when obviously a huge typhoon struck. So to be flexible there and change plans has happened. And that's, totally, you accept it and you move on, appreciate how lucky you are that you can move on from these places where others can't. And yeah, so that's been a slight flexibility for us. But other than that, we've pretty much stuck to it.
Yeah. We've also got we've got some of Luca's family joining us in Indonesia, and we've got one of my best friends joining us in New Zealand. And because those were locked in, people are visiting, my friend had to book a flight. Those are fixed dates.
Yeah.
And so it's been quite nice knowing like this is happening then. Things can change around that. We had more flexibility in Southeast Asia. We hadn't booked all of that before we left, but we'd booked everything from
flights and buses
from Indonesia onwards, because Australia and New Zealand, it's great to get those expenses paid for before you leave when you still have a salary. It makes it seem much more less daunting. But yeah,
that is another novel way to think about that. I really like that. We're going to come back to the typhoon conversation in a little bit, because I had not realized you were stuck in that, and I would love to hear about that experience. But let's dig into the budget conversation first, because I think for many aspirational travelers, cost is just a total black box. And I know you guys are sharing a bit on social media about like what specific experiences cost. So let's dig in a little bit here and see if we can shed some light for other long-term travelers. So it sounds like you guys are spending against a budget. What's your budget, and what does that translate into in terms of what kinds of accommodations are you staying in? What are you eating? How are you getting around?
First off, I think we've kind of realized, having spoken to lots of backpackers, actually cheaper it is traveling as a couple for so many reasons. And that's something we hadn't really considered before traveling. But in terms of accommodation, for example, we use a lot of, I won't name the apps that we use, but you know all the standard apps that you use for booking accommodation on. Share a room is basically half the cost of a hostel sometimes. It's so much cheaper than, I think we assumed we'd been in a load of hostels, but we're in a hostel now in Singapore, but actually we've only been to 3 hostels in 3 months. Like, we're surprisingly finding it so much cheaper just sharing double rooms that we've kind of booked online. So that's been a huge money saver.
Yeah, I think our budget when we left was pretty much as we could save, because we had the time when we wanted to leave. And there's only a certain amount of flexibility you have with that when it comes to renting properties and having jobs and leaving jobs. So we knew when we were leaving, we were saving as much as we could before then. And then with what we had left, we created budgets for each of the countries based on how long we were going to be there. So for most of Southeast Asia, we have a budget of £74 a day for both of us. And that's what we have. Some days, travel days, if you've got a flight, you're going to go over. Some days when you do nothing, you're going to go under. But as long as we average within that budget, we know that when we get to Australia, we have enough money. Or when we get to Indonesia, we can spend what we want. So it's quite nice knowing the daily budget and knowing that we're not going to run out of money before we reach the next country, because we have something to help keep us on track, which is really useful.
And it is a bit of a compromise, because we are having to track. We track daily spends basically on a notes app. So everything we spend, we will just quickly note down, and then at the end of the day, we'll double check and then throw it into a spreadsheet. And it is a bit, it takes a bit of time, and it does slightly draw you out of experiences, but it means that we can have more experiences, because we know across the weeks and the months, we're like, okay, today felt expensive, but we only went over by £5. So let's go under by £5 tomorrow and even it out. So that's a really nice thing. That means sometimes we look at experiences and go, oh, we can justify a boat trip. We've saved £20 this week. Let's just do it. And that's something that I don't think many people think about while backpacking, because they just think, I need to save money. I won't do it. Or they do the opposite, do everything and then go home with absolutely no money.
I have to scrimp everywhere. So I did something really similar when my husband and I traveled, and we had an app that I don't remember the name of, but we wrote down every expense. And then once a week, I put it in our spreadsheet. And there is another surprise benefit, which is that if you realize we started in Italy, we were spending way less than I thought we would. I was so afraid that in Europe we would totally blow our budget. We saved a ton of money relative to what we had forecast. And so then when we were traveling in Southeast Asia, we were like, oh, we can stay in nicer places because
Yeah.
we have this money to carry forward. And so that's a lovely it's a lovely perk of tracking. Um
Yeah.
let's see. So thank you for sharing that. I think that that is really valuable to travelers to try to get a sense of like, okay, let me take away this black box component and understand what this will actually cost. Let's talk about amazing travel moments and then travel crises, travel mistakes. Let's talk about the typhoon. What was that like in Vietnam? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was. I mean, obviously, it's only as bad as it is for travelers in the sense that we've skipped parts of our trip, but the real sadness is the areas and the people that are there. Like, it's just so heartbreaking to like sort of know that you're skipping over these places and there's just so many people living there that are having to deal with what's going on. So I think we're just really lucky in that sense. But at the same time, going into it, I mean, Ellie, I'd say of the two of us is more of a planner than I am. I'm a bit more laissez-faire, a bit more like, oh, we'll just wing it. It'll be fine. So Ellie, about 2 weeks beforehand, sort of was nudging me politely, being like, I don't know if there's some pretty bad weather approaching on our route. And I was just like, it'll be fine, whatever. What'll be, will be. And then the sooner we got to the time, about a week before, Ellie sort of nudging me slightly harder and being a bit more, understanding of the situation that is unfolding that I've not quite witnessed yet. And then we both realized, yeah, we have to change our plans and accept that the trip is changing,
Yeah, it was one of the things where because we were being spontaneous in Southeast Asia, for the rest of the trip, most of our accommodation transport was refundable. For this section, we just booked it 2 days before. It was non-refundable because why would it need to be? We're there next week. And then, of course, we were like, okay, so do we want to risk not going and losing this money or going and being flooded? And at that point, I think more of a pessimist, more of an optimist. I was like, it's probably more viable to think of the worst case scenario here than the best case scenario. Best case scenario is we go and it's a nice time. Worst case scenario, we get stuck in a flood, in a typhoon. Probably you don't know when you're going to leave. So we did end up cancelling and skipping whole of central Vietnam and then going to Ho Chi Minh. And we actually then avoided it going into Cambodia. It then hit Ho Chi Minh, left Cambodia, hit Cambodia, reached Thailand. And that's when we were in a lot of rain for about 2 weeks, but it was manageable rain because then it was traveling north. So we just missed it, but we were really lucky because if we'd stayed in it, it would have followed us for about a month and a half.
Yeah, the best weather since then, and like obviously totally incomparable to the typhoon. But we've had a lot of rain in like Southeast Asia, like from that point. But yeah, as Ellie says, it was just very manageable weather, and it was one of those things where our route changed, and because we'd skipped our section, it then gave us a new opportunity to say, okay, we've now got 2 weeks that we weren't originally going to have to spread out across this new area. So how are we going to? We could spend longer in Cambodia, for example. We got to spend longer in some of the Thai islands.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, again, from that situation, we were able to create opportunity from it, which I think is the first thing you have to think as a backpacker when the world is against you and it's just a bit shit.
Yeah, you have to be flexible. And I think you guys I appreciate your mindset as well, thinking like we're lucky to even consider going here in the first place and really thinking of the locals first. And certainly, yeah, the flexibility goes a long way. Let's talk about the other side because, I love talking about travel mistakes, but travel mistakes and things that go wrong and crises because they're they're interesting stories and they're unique, but there are also so many like lovely life-changing, memorable moments that come from travel. If you guys had to pick maybe one each, like a moment on the trip so far where you thought, I'm gonna remember this for the rest of my life, what would you say? Or has it happened yet?
I mean, a memory that I'll remember for the rest of my life is all of last week when we were skipping through Georgetown in Malaysia and I was reading out a list of food spots I was really excited to go to that day with Ellie. And then I fell off a pavement and sprained my ankle. And I think that's a memory that's going to stick with me forever. But again, that was just one of those negative moments that you just deal with and is, sort of fine now. I think the best memory for me would probably be right near the start of the trip, we first got to Japan and we were just so blown away by the fact that we were on this trip that we for a year and a half, 2 years for. It's that sort of weird fever dream energy that you get when you arrive in a new place where it's just all so surreal. We got to Fuji Yoshida near Mount Fuji, and we were just praying that we'd be able to see Mount Fuji, but knowing full well that there's only, I think it's something like less than 100 days of the year that you can actually see this mountain. There's so many clouds. We were sort of going in with the expectation of if it's there, it'll be nice, but it won't be. And when we arrived, having seen a week of poor visibility, the clouds had all opened. This just beautiful mountain was just there for the whole week. And it was just amazing. And like, yeah, the world felt really behind us at that point, and it was just really nice.
That's so beautiful. Ellie, what about you?
Um, I think my experience has been quite different because I've been really fortunate enough to travel quite a lot as a child. And so I've been to some of the countries we've been to in Southeast Asia before, but at an age where I didn't really have the same love for travel, or I didn't really actually know where I was. I was just following my parents around somewhere in Asia. And so going back now and recognizing things and knowing that I brought myself back here and that now I'm on my adventure is really lovely. And we've been tracking our journey with our family. And I think we were in somewhere in South Thailand when my grandpa commented, he was like, I was there in 1979 with your grandmother. And it's just like that whole thing is like, wow, I'm like following my family's footsteps by myself for an adventure that I funded by myself. It was just a really like proud moment to be kind of recreating these things like as my own adult, if that makes sense.
It's amazing connections all over the world and feel such a part of it. I want to talk about what it's like to travel with a partner because I did this as well, and I remember going into it thinking, I love my husband. We both work, and I mean, we'll chit chat over meals or in the evening we'll go for a walk, but it's really different when you're traveling long term with someone. You're chatting, like you are basically in conversation 12 hours a day. And it's a totally different dynamic.
Talks in her sleep. I get 24 hours a day. I mean, I'm just constantly in conversation with Ellie. No, yeah, you're spot on.
Has it changed your relationship at all?
I think it's made it stronger. I think as you say, it's such a huge thing to undertake. And enough people said to us before we went on the trip, they were like, oh, it'll be make or break, which is always slightly ominous at that point. But I think I think one of the best things we did before this trip was going on city breaks together. So like we went on 4 trips before this big travel. Just like we went to Italy, I went to Marrakesh, we went to Budapest, and we went to Amsterdam. We had these little like intense mini break holidays, like, over a quick weekend on a super budget. So we were sort of living out a backpack, doing what we are doing now for 10 months. But that really helped us to sort of, I don't know, the fact that we could laugh about things going wrong then made us both realize that this will be fine. We're not the kind of couple that if one thing went wrong, one of us would like stress and then take out on the other one. It's just worked really nicely. And that compatibility was there from the start, which I think made it quite easy for us.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to have in a relationship that you want to travel with is knowing that you're a team and it's not you against the other person, it's you against the issue that you're facing. So if one of you makes a mistake, like I think quite early on, we lost a little bit of money. We didn't get annoyed at each other for the fact that they lost that money. You're just like, okay, well, how are we going to overcome this together? Because I think the more that you kind of attack someone for making a mistake, the more likely you are to lose the trust in like the foundation you have to survive it. Because ultimately, like my dad said in tears when we said goodbye, Luca, take care of me. He's taking care of me and I'm taking care of him. I've had food poisoning a couple of times and Luca's been able to go to the shops and buy me electrolytes. Like, again, one of the benefits of traveling as a couple, when Luca sprained his ankle, I could get us food. It's knowing even more so than before that we have each other's back. And I think in that way, it strengthened the relationship a lot. We have a lot more comfortable silence than we did before we left because we don't have a separate day to talk about. So more card games over dinner than conversations, but knowing that you're experiencing something more profound than that. So,
yeah, I felt very similarly traveling with my husband. I think we got a lot closer, and we were already very close. But by the end, I felt like I would have described him before as my soulmate, And I'm not really someone who uses that word. And I don't know what's deeper than that. I don't know, but it felt more profound. And I think, Ellie, what I hear you saying is you just get so many reps at taking care of each other and figuring out issues together. It's practice, but very quickly all at once. Um, and maybe that's where the make or break comes from, Luca.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been great as well for like compromise, because there'll be some days when like we have different energy levels, or one of us is maybe feeling homesick and the other isn't. And maybe if we'd planned to do something really exciting and the other person suddenly isn't in the mood for it, you have to like compromise of maybe I'll miss out on that experience, but I know that I need to support my partner today. Or maybe I won't go to that restaurant because there's nothing that my partner wants to eat. Like small compromises more and more every day, that I think is just, again, a good strengthening of the relationship.
Yeah. Did you guys think about safety before you left, or precautions that you would take? And has that evolved as you've been on the road?
Yeah, I think it has. I think we've sort of, going into a trip like this, I think you sort of have to take a first base stance of a reality check. Like, we are tourists and we do have to take precautions and sort of be respectful of the places we're visiting in that sense. But I think a lot of the sort of maybe anxieties we had going into this haven't been as bad as we maybe expected, and that sort of helped. So like the food poisoning we've had, like it wasn't maybe as bad as like the fear that you have when you're like, oh gosh, it's going to be awful. Maybe we're lucky in that sense, or maybe it's just not as bad as it seems, and then you don't want to worry about it twice. So it's just like,
have you had to
it's not too bad.
Any fears?
But I was absolutely terrified of food poisoning. I don't like food. Stresses me out quite a lot. Like, I think one of the biggest discomforts I've had is not being able to eat what I want to eat. And it's not that I'm a fussy eater, but I like my beans and my vegetables, and I'm also a vegetarian. And so traveling, eating out, they're not the foods that you're going to come by. That's not what you have. And especially because often the healthier foods are the salads, but salads are a risky food group because of the water, you can't trust that. But healthy food's often more expensive. And I was really worried about getting food poisoning. And I thought that I would be less risk because I was a vegetarian versus a meat eater. But actually, I quickly learned that I've only been food poisoned twice, and both were from raw cheese, funnily enough. And that was when I went to have a comfort food, a Western food. I think I had like feta on avocado or something. And you learn that actually the local food is safer because that's what they eat, that's what they cook. And so it's having like the trust in that. But I was so worried about getting food poisoned. And after I got it the first time, every single time I ate anything, I was like, oh my God, is my stomach feeling sore? Am I going to throw up tonight? Like, oh my goodness. And I was just getting so stressed. I ended up like making myself unwell from anxiety. And it's like learning that is not worth it. I've been food poisoned once, 2 months later, and it was fine. It was not worth the stress for those months in between.
You nearly woke me up once because you heard my stomach gurgling and you were like, I think you might have food poisoning. And it is a stressful experience. And I mean, yeah, we definitely didn't expect the way around. Like as Ellie says, I'm a meat eater, and you'd assume maybe going into this trip that like chicken and beef like that might cause food poisoning worse. But no, I've been, touch wood, quite lucky so far.
Yeah.
But
I think as well, unfortunately, the first time that I got food poisoning was right before a really, really long travel day on a slow boat. And so everything associated with the food poisoning was the fact that tomorrow I had to be on a slow boat for 8 hours. There's not going to be a bathroom. I'm not going to be in bed. And I think the fact that I managed to do that when I had food poisoning made me realize actually, like, it is fine. You can, I've made it in my head to be so much worse than it was. But you can push through things, and that made me realize that it's not actually as bad as I thought.
That's the worst thing for food poisoning.
Yeah. Oh, I think you're in great shape if that's the worst thing that happens. And I think you're right. The discomforts can kind of compound. Like, you get sick and you're staying in a hostel and you have to lock your stuff up, and you're sick and you don't want to deal with that. And, all of those little things can add up. But I think you also learn, oh, I can handle this. This is no big deal. Are there any like budget hacks that you would want to share with other people who are trying to be very budget conscious when they take on a long-term trip?
think it's not even a massive hack, but one of the things we sort of do a lot as a couple traveling, which I think is so helpful, is that we just basically share everything, really. Like, we're quite lucky in the sense that we have similar tastes and similar sort of feelings. But like, for example, we've come to a cafe now and we will just share a drink together because realistically, like, we're craving a coffee. So we'll share a coffee, and having half a coffee each is usually what we want anyway. And then we've saved whatever. I mean, this in Singapore, coffee is expensive. My God. But like that alone, like if we want to like try something, just splitting it basically is halving the cost every time. So I think across the 3 months of sharing things we've had, like we've saved, hundreds of pounds, which is a small thing, but has gone quite a long way.
It's nice to have half for something you wouldn't otherwise have experienced and have to think of everything as being twice the cost. Because we're using a joint account for this for the daily budget. If we do want things and we're thinking of one each, then it's suddenly twice as expensive. But if you want to try that local dish that you're never going to try again, then get it and split it and it's half now. But I think it's about knowing that you're not going to be able to afford to do everything before you leave and take that expectation off. Like, you're not going to come to Singapore and pay £40 to go onto the top of the building. Like, realistically, if you're on a budget, but knowing that beforehand means you're not going to experience a disappointment when you get there. You just know that you can do some things, you can prioritize the experiences you want to prioritize or the food that you want to try, but you don't have to pay to do everything. And that doesn't mean you're missing out. You're still experiencing it, but just in your own way.
And you still do everything. The world is too big to do everything. We can't go to every experience. So it's quite nice to sort of tailor it to yourself and think, okay, what's the one thing I really want to do while I'm here? And how can I sort of justify that? And in that sense, that's how I think we've managed to make this a 10-month trip rather than a 1-month trip, because it's meant that we're able to see so many different places and do so many different things rather than just maybe if we'd spent 1 month in Australia, for example.
All right. I have 2 final questions for both of you. I'm going to ask each of you to answer them. So first is, if you had one piece of advice, had to give one piece of advice to other people who want to travel long term, what would it be? I'll start with you, Luca.
One piece of advice. I'd say probably, I mean, this is a really cliche one because I feel like everyone says this, but the fact that everyone says it means it's all the more important. I think just do it. Like, don't necessarily wait for the perfect time to take that travel, because I don't think there ever really is a perfect time. And I think we were lucky in the sense that we were at a period in our lives where we sort of were like ready to take this trip in terms of our jobs, in terms of, how much we'd saved. So I think just taking the leap and knowing that you might have a few anxieties or you might have a few things that you're like, oh no, I need to save this for this certain thing, or I need to, for example, like wait until I've got this X, Y, whatever, finish this. I think there's always going to be something in the back of your mind that you could do as well. But travel is just so good. We absolutely love it anyway. So just take that trip when you can, rather than when you think you should.
Yeah, love that. What about you, Ellie?
I think I'd say, like, obviously use other people's experiences, use their advice, but take everything with a pinch of salt. Nothing is more important than your opinions, your desires, what you want to gain from the trip. And I think, like, even I've been a victim to it when you go on social media and you see one of our friends who've been somewhere that we've just been, except for they've gone on holiday there and they're staying in a hotel and they're eating everything and they're going to everything. And I'm there like, oh, I feel a bit sad that I haven't done that. That's not the type of trip that you're on. And it's like, don't necessarily engage with that sort of thing, and just know what you want to gain from the trip, what you want to experience, and customize your travel for that, rather than try and do what everyone else is doing, because that might not be right for you. You might not want, for example, everyone told us to do the Hajang Loop. Every single person we've ever met. We didn't do it. We don't regret it. Like, it's expensive and I'm not that comfortable on the motorbike. It wasn't for me, and it might have been amazing. But just because everyone told us to do it doesn't mean that you should do it, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be great.
All right. Last question for you guys. You have 7 months ahead of you. Where are you most looking forward to visiting next?
We're going to say the same place.
Where are you going to say?
Okay, so you're going to say New Zealand.
Yeah.
Go on, you go first.
I'm so excited for New Zealand. I think because it always seems like such a bucket list thing, it's so expensive to get there and it's so expensive once you're there. I never thought that I was going to go. And now it's kind of more accessible. It's still super expensive. And we're still going to be living off probably baked beans. We're living in a camper van with one of my best friends. But I'm just so excited because one of my favorite parts of travel is natural landscape. I love scenery. I love mountains. I grew up in Scotland, and New Zealand's kind of like a upgraded Scotland in a way. The mountains are just 10 times bigger. And
a lot of spots there.
The water's so blue. And I'm just so excited for the hikes and the nature. And especially after doing so long in cities, I think it's going to feel even more kind of like of a wild adventure, I think. But I'm really excited for New Zealand.
That sounds amazing. Luca, is it the same for you?
It probably is New Zealand, just because, as Ellie says, I think it's literally the furthest we could be from the UK anyway. So it's such a long trip, and we're going to be spending a month in beautiful scenery. But I'll actually say Australia, I think, because that's just before, but we're spending 3 months in Australia. And it'll be a sort of, so we're basically going to be working because we've sort of, we need to get some jobs. But the plan is to get some jobs in Melbourne because we're living there for 2.5 months. And I'm really excited for that because despite the fact that travel's amazing and we've loved it, I think we're both sort of excited to live somewhere for a bit and just have that sort of base feeling again. So when we're in Melbourne and we can do like a weekly food shop and cook meals, because we haven't cooked a meal for so long, like other than, quick bites to eat in hostels. So I think I'm really excited to get to Melbourne to sort of have some sort of sense of familiarity, yeah, and like just living as a couple again, which is, you do miss when you travel. You just want sometimes a sort of more homely feel. So I'm really excited for that. But then as soon as I get there, I'll be thinking about New Zealand.
Oh, so it's Australia first and then New Zealand, or New Zealand after?
Mm-hmm. Australia first.
Lovely. Yeah. Well, I'm jealous. I think that sounds amazing. I've been to 38 countries and I have not gone to Australia or New Zealand. But I'm very excited for you guys. And I really hope you enjoy the rest of your trip as much as you've enjoyed the first 3 months. I think I'm so happy that you guys get to take advantage of an experience like this. And thank you so much for coming to talk to me today. It's such a pleasure to chat and hear more about your story.
Thanks so much for having us, Maria. It's been so lovely.
Guys, thanks for tuning in and for joining us for that wonderful conversation. I hope you got a lot of budget hacks out of it. I hope if you are a couple considering a long-term trip that we put your mind at ease a little bit, that traveling with your significant other can actually improve your relationship. You might end up closer than ever. If you loved this content, please help me out with a like and subscribe. You can also find Travelries content on Instagram, Facebook, Threads. We have a Substack where we publish blog posts weekly. And we also have a monthly mailing list through our website, travelries.com. And then, of course, if you're exploring long-term travel for you and you've been duly inspired by Ellie and Luca, you can always set up a free consult directly with me through our website, travelries.com. And we can chat and figure out what's right for you and potentially if I can even help you plan your trip. See you guys very soon.